Tracy. Pardon us as we work with our microphones here to make sure that we don't end up with screeching noises. I'm going to go ahead and pick up where Tracy and Lucia left off. My job is to help you all figure out, well, what does this all mean for us? I mean, what should we do differently? What are really great boards doing to make sure that they're beyond reproach when it comes to these issues of conflict of interest and independence? And so I'm going to be sharing with you some practices from not-for-profit organizations in all different types of industries. And I'm going to start with the conflict of interest practices. And Tracy was just talking about a couple of the things that I think are really important. So let's get up there. You know, if you're a new board member coming into a tax-exempt organization, I think it's really a lot to ask someone to understand everything we've just been talking about. And so I think it's really critical that every single board have a robust orientation session for their new board members that goes over certainly the legal aspects, as Tracy has been, and the tax issues, as Lucian has been. But I also think it's helpful to have real examples. So your orientation isn't, you know, just the slide that we showed around fiduciary duties, but that you give example after example of what is you know, a difficult situation and what is one that is a way to handle things that become difficult. And I think if we don't really do that, then we're putting our new board members at a real disservice. And by the way, I would do that orientation for committee members too, because in many cases, if a committee has been delegated authority by the board, then those people are also subject to the fiduciary duties. So you need to be sure that you're helping board and committee members get oriented. Annually, there should be an education process for all board members and committee members to tell them what's new, what's different. This is a moving target. As many of you in the room know, we are getting new information about what the IRS is saying and what other entities are requiring. And so I think we owe our colleagues a lot of education on an ongoing basis about this. Detailed disclosure forms. This is the piece Tracy was talking about. I want to go into more detail on. Oftentimes when we're asked to look at an organization's conflict of interest policy and form, I'll look at the form and there are no blanks in it other than just sort of, could you declare any possible conflicts of interest you might have? And so if you might put in there, oh yes, you know, my brother-in-law just bought some real estate that is next door to the long-term care facility on whose board I'm sitting. But I don't think we often enough actually have the additional lines which say, and what ownership percentage is that? Or what dollar amount are you getting as an attorney who's providing, you know, services to this entity? So revisit all your disclosure forms and make sure that you're asking for all the detailed information you're going to need to determine whether or not someone is independent as you get around to figuring out what percentage of your board is independent and whether your committees, which I'll talk about in a minute, have the sufficient number of independent members on them. Independent director review of disclosures. So once you've got all those forms filled out, you know, I would highly recommend that you have independent directors review the filled out forms. And I was recently with a board who said, we fill out the forms, but we don't know where they go. And the CEO said, oh, I get them. And I tried not to do what I'm doing right now. You know, I tried to, okay, tell me why you do that. Because the CEO certainly is not an independent member looking at these people to determine whether or not they're independent. So I think whoever, perhaps you have an audit committee to set up with independent members. Perhaps you've decided that you're going to have all independent members on a compensation committee. Use a group of people who are totally independent, beyond reproach, to look at the forms. And then, an advanced practice is then provide a summary to the full board. So this little group of independent members who looked over the forms would write a summary that says, okay, by the way, board, here's who we have on our board this year, and these are some of the potential conflicts of interest. So we just want you to be aware of it. So as Tracy said, if you get in the middle of a conversation, it's a whole lot easier for someone to say, Joe, didn't your brother just buy that property next to, you know, our long-term care facility here? Doesn't that mean you have a potential conflict of interest? It's easier for the board members to be able to handle that situation if the information has been provided ahead of time. And of course, you're not going to provide all the board detail on it, that wouldn't be appropriate, but just sort of a heads up around what are some of the potential areas of conflict. I've seen boards recently at every meeting start out with declaration of any conflicts of interest. So the chair literally says, is there anyone here who has a potential conflict of interest with the items that are on our board or committee meeting agenda for today? And they wait, and someone goes through the little summary, and they literally start every meeting asking for any disclosures that are necessary. It's a little thing, but again, what these practices do for you is give you policies and procedures that make it easy for you to be honest, to call somebody who's forgetting to identify themselves. And so that's what you want to have. You want to have a board that's got, I'm skipping down a little bit here, but you want a culture in the board or committee that makes it really, not just easy, but expected. That you're going to be very open and transparent about all of your relationships and your transactions so that nothing can be questioned. And then lastly, for those of you who are with healthcare organizations, one thing that we're seeing more of now is a board-level policy that speaks specifically to physicians' involvement in governance and more specifically to physician conflict of interest. Some of you may be aware of organizations that have created such policies. One that got a lot of national attention was Ohio Health. They, as a health system, were facing a situation in which they had physicians who were going to open up a competing specialty hospital, and the board at Ohio Health created a policy that indicated that the physicians who were going to go open up and invest in this specialty hospital would not be able to serve on the medical staff of the Ohio Health hospitals. It was very controversial at the time. There were a whole lot of articles and speeches being given about the issue. Whether you decide to go that far would be up to you. But what I would suggest is think carefully as a board about what policies you want to have in place to make sure that you don't end up with people serving on your board or, in the case of a hospital, serving on your medical staff who are conflicted from the get-go. And that's really where I'm going with that. And interestingly enough, just having the conversation sometimes among the people serving on the board about whether or not we should have such a policy is worth doing. You may not end up writing a policy, but at least you had a conversation around whether you think there's anything that should be codified or codified in writing. So those were conflicts of interest advanced practices. Now I'm going to speak more specifically to independence-related practices. And as Lucian and Tracy both said, there's very little that's totally firm in this whole area of independence. And so you're going to notice I've used different words here, like must or should. And Lucian and I were talking about this just right before this session. This recommendation that the majority of the full board must be independent. That if you happen to be a healthcare organization, as Lucian said, and you want the community benefit standard, in other words, you want to retain your tax-exempt status as a community benefit organization, then you must have 100% of you must have the majority of your board be independent. As Lucian stated earlier, he's even seen some tax-exempt organizations that don't have anything to do with healthcare that are being told they had to have more independent board members serving on them. The second bullet point, making sure that whatever committee or entity oversees executive compensation must be independent. Now, and Lucian talked already about why that needs to be the case. You want the rebuttable presumption of reasonableness. In other words, you as a board want to make sure that your decision isn't going to be questioned by the IRS. You want to put on the IRS the task of proving that what you did is wrong. And so if you use those steps that Lucian described that are part of the rebuttable presumption of reasonableness, then the monkey's off your back. Then you're in a position where the IRS has to prove that they don't think what you did is right. So whatever group is overseeing executive compensation really needs to be totally independent. And this one, you probably all know this. I hope none of you are living it firsthand.